I'm so excited to be here in Berlin speaking at an in-person conference. It's just so much better than online events. It's really great to be here and to see you all, and thank you for coming. I'm Hannah Foxwell, and today I'm going to be talking about shifting left the wrong way. DevOps feels like it's old news, doesn't it? It's been a thing for over a decade. It's a term that's been used and abused to the point where it's almost lost all of its meaning. But the bad news is that the problems that DevOps set out to address are still problems for many of us today in our organizations and in our day-to-day lives. And I've been doing this DevOpsy thing for a while, and I've learned a few lessons about what to do and what not to do along the way. So today, I am aiming to share a few of those lessons with you. In 2010, DevOps set out to solve this problem, the wall of confusion. On the left, dev teams focused on features. On the right, ops teams were really focused on stability and reliability. It was a world where one side wanted to change all the things at speed, and the other side wanted to change nothing. You know, devs, they would release software, they'd throw it over the wall to ops without warning, and they were expected to drop everything and get it running. It was a world of poor handoffs, terrible feedback, and a really miserable experience for all involved. I had a very miserable experience at the start of my career as a release manager. I was a release manager for a large retailer in the UK, and I felt like I was literally sat on top of that wall of confusion with spreadsheets and checklists, trying desperately to get people to talk to each other, trying desperately to get people to work together. And it was really hard. And it was that experience of how painful it was, how difficult it was just to ship the smallest of changes into the hands of our users, into our production environments, is why I took an interest in DevOps in the beginning. I thought, this can't be the answer. There has to be a better way. But changing organizations is hard, and it takes a long time. And I often found that the human aspects of DevOps were neglected in favor of shiny new tools and technologies that were supposed to be the silver bullet and solve our problems. The human side of DevOps is my thing, and I've been really lucky to spend the last 4.5 years putting some of the theory into practice, innovating on practices, and experimenting with my clients all over the world to figure out what works and what doesn't work, helping them build wildly successful platform teams that address some of these constraints and some of this misalignment that we see in our organizations today. When I look back at the problems that I was experiencing in my career 10 years ago, those problems were at a point in time. Since then, we have embraced new tools, new platforms, new engineering practices, new technologies. We've built really amazing communities and foundations, and we've learned from each other. We've learned from the community, and we've learned from some really visionary leaders about what they've been doing. Before DevOps was even called DevOps, the problem that we were trying to solve had been identified, and it remains the same today. It's about how we deliver software rapidly, safely, and securely into the hands of our users. You'll be relieved to hear that this is not a talk about Kubernetes. I'm sure there are a few at this conference. The processes and practices that I'm advocating for should be transferable to any team who are delivering software, no matter what the technology stack you're using is. In my day job, I work with really huge organizations, so I'm a little bit biased towards that very enterprisey version of DevOps. But whether you're a bank, a government, a retailer, or whether you're a startup with a small team, some of these very simple ideas can be transferred. It might just be a little bit easier to implement in your context. Whether you're big or small, I hope there's something you can take away from this talk today. When I talk about building platforms, I am often talking about building Kubernetes-based platforms, because that's what me and my team do day in, day out. But if you're using PaaS or SaaS, or if you have something in between, there should be practices that you can take away from this and you can transfer into your own organization. Can you believe it was 2006? That's a long time ago, isn't it? At Amazon, where this was the narrative from their CTO: you build it, you run it. Seems like a really good idea. as a developer building an application, you have the domain knowledge about how that software works, how it should work, what it's supposed to do. You know if it's functioning correctly, when it's performing well, and most importantly, you know how to fix it when it breaks. Today, dev teams are more than just developers. It includes many different roles, creating cross-functional teams that are able to deliver software, deliver solutions into the hands of their users. You might be a balanced, autonomous delivery team that is able to ship software into production without any dependencies on anyone else. And if you are, that is awesome. You should keep doing that for as long as you can. If, however, like a lot of the people that I work with, you're consuming shared services or you're building shared services that are only one small part of a whole solution, then this talk is definitely for you. I'm talking about how to deliver value to our end users when actually we need more than one team, when we're a team of teams delivering an outcome together. So how do you apply, you build it, you run it, when there's more than one team building things and running things? How do you still keep all of that DevOps goodness and fast feedback loops and ownership without rebuilding that wall of confusion in a different place? Production is where our users are. It is where we deliver value. Production is the happiest place on earth. It's unfortunately a really scary thing in a lot of organizations. A lot of the people I work with are still wrestling with fear of production. They don't want to touch it. It's very precious. It's very brittle. They've been burnt too many times by too many changes in production. The goal of all of this is to unblock that path to production, to give us confidence that we can push changes safely, securely, and rapidly, to delight our users by streamlining that process and removing the handoffs that get in the way. But even though we all know what the mission is, we still struggle. Only 52% of new apps ever make it to production. 48% never make it into the hands of a single user. That's a frightening statistic, isn't it? And only 54% of software updates and upgrades make it into production. And of the ones that do, only 51% make it in the planned time frame. 49% of those are late or delayed, and not delivering the value they expected to their organization. So I think these are really scary statistics when you think about it. When you think about the waste of time and effort and human endeavor that goes into the unfulfilled kind of promises of software delivery in our organizations today. When we talk about shifting left, some folks went to the extreme. They went as far as to say that the problem with shipping software safely, securely, and quickly into the hands of their users was actually the ops team themselves. No ops was a thing. And it's a clear case where, these misaligned incentives, these misaligned expectations of who should care about what, drove this behavior. It was perceived that the operations team didn't care about users because they wouldn't allow us to put new features, new changes into their hands, and so we were better off without them, which is, absolutely baffling when you think about all of the stuff and the things that sit within that ops domain. And again, this is an example of some of that more opsy stuff that we really need to care about. Shifting left is a really great idea, but are some of us throwing too much left, putting too much into the hands of our software development teams, of our application development teams, in pursuit of velocity above all else? We know that teams who have autonomy and ownership are more productive, but is there a tipping point? How much responsibility is it realistic for a dev team to take on? Is the domain knowledge required to do a good job of it, the complexity that it introduces, the extra work it introduces, simply too much? And shouldn't building apps that delight their users be the priority anyway? Now, I know I said this wasn't a talk about Kubernetes, but this is a problem that I see time and time again when we do work with our clients on adoption of platforms like Kubernetes, because it does blur the lines between application concerns and infrastructure concerns, which is incredibly powerful, but it does put a lot of that complexity into the hands of our development teams, and a lot of them aren't very happy about it. I heard this devastating news the other day, that apparently developers don't really like working with all that YAML, and it's not surprising really, is it? And given the huge problem space Kubernetes aims to solve for and the enormous surface area it gives you for configuration, there's an awful lot of opportunity to get things wrong. And there's an awful lot of learning that needs to go into adopting a new technology like that. And when I look at the increasing demand for new applications, for businesses to respond with velocity and agility, and the increasing complexity that each developer needs to wrestle with, I'm not surprised when I see statistics like this, that 83% of developers have or are suffered from burnout. And I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's okay. And one of the reasons that I became interested in DevOps in the first place was because I wanted to solve for the human suffering that I was seeing all around me. You know, the conflict that I was seeing between dev and ops, and you know, our inability to serve our business as a technology function. And so, you know, I've always taken a very human-centered approach to solving this problem, and I'm going to share some of those practices with you today. Can I get a show of hands? Who in this room holds the pager in their organization? Have we got any? Yeah, we've got a couple of people. No, it's not an easy job, and sometimes we make it harder for ourselves. But you know, one part of the human ops movement is the realization and the championing that the well-being of your team will impact the reliability and health of your systems. You know, in extreme cases, things like sleep deprivation, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, stress, all of these things, they take a toll on you as a person, not to mention the impact that out-of-hours work has on your personal life and your relationships. Back in 2014, I started my own DevOps consultancy, and we were really focused on doing infrastructure as code. But what I realized very rapidly is while we were solving these automation-centric problems, is that it was actually the human problems that were taking longer to solve, the organizational problems that were standing in the way of adopting some of these new technical practices. And that's when I started to get involved in the human ops community in London. So you build it, you run it. That feels like the right approach. But how can we do it without burning out our development teams? How do we achieve that balance between velocity and sustainability when we have so many problems to solve? Indeed, I've seen, like several times in my career, any task that gets shifted left, anything that lands on the backlog of the development team that doesn't really add direct value to users sinks to the bottom of that backlog because there's always more important things to be done. So to shift left successfully, we need a different approach to how we build and run our systems. No ops isn't the answer. Throwing everything left, throwing all that complexity into the hands of development team doesn't feel like the answer either. But nor is the old siloed way of doing things where we throw releases over the wall into the hands of operations. I always say that good fences make good neighbours. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the practical changes you can make to solve some of these age-old problems simply by organizing your teams around the different problem domains. This is a really simple model that describes how I think about platforms and platform teams. There's many ways to organize your teams, but this is a pattern that I've seen to be quite successful in the organizations I work with. So the application team, they deliver apps and services for their end users. They build it and they support their apps. The platform team provide a platform service for those application teams. They deliver tools and tools and features that allow those application teams to build and run and ship into production successfully. And then, of course, there's always an infrastructure team. They're providing an infrastructure as a service to the platform team, possibly directly to some application teams as well. But the important thing is they're providing it as a service. They're building it, they're supporting it. I see far too often that the supporting it elements of the work to be done, the ops parts, are delegated to those platform teams. They're delegated to, whether you call it a DevOps team, an SRE team, an ops team. But actually, ownership of your service in production, consuming those services that are provided to you by other teams is one way that we can break down those silos and work more autonomously without shipping all of that complexity into the hand of application teams. One thing that I would also advocate for strongly is a product mindset across all of these different layers. It's one part that's often forgotten especially in the really underlying infrastructure and platform layers. But if you're going to build a service that's going to be used by someone, you need to be thinking about what that someone needs from that service. You need to take a product mindset. And that's the thing that's common between all of these different teams. They're all going to build an amazing product and a valuable service to their users. It's just their users that are different. And if you frame it in that way, you start to think about these platform problems in a different way. So the application teams, they're clearly going to build an amazing product and a valuable service for their users. But so are the platform teams. Their users are the app devs. They're going to build an amazing product and a valuable service for their users. And obviously the infrastructure team as well. Some of us have divested that product development to the public cloud providers, which is awesome. Do you think they don't have product managers? Of course they do. They're delivering an amazing product and a valuable service for their users. You're consuming it through an API or through the online portals, but there is somebody there who's caring about the user experience. And especially if you're running your own infrastructure, it's often forgotten. And that's why so often, your internal data center teams, the infrastructure team that you have yourself, can't really compete with the public clouds. It's just so much easier to use and adopt a public cloud where they have thought about that user experience, where they have thought about removing those barriers to entry. And when you put that user experience side by side with a ticketing system where you maybe have to wait a month for a single VM, it's just not comparable. And this is how we end up with sprawl of different technologies and different solutions across organizations, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if it delivers an outcome. But a lot of the folks that I work with, they don't want to see that duplication. They don't want to see everyone solving the problem in different ways. They want to be leveraging, best of breed solutions from a kind of center of excellence. The problem is that these centers of excellence are often too slow. So we need to figure out how to drive adoption of our internal platforms as well. Otherwise, people will simply choose something else. And of course, the needs of our users never stop changing. So whether we're building infrastructure, platforms, CI/CD tooling, the needs of our users won't stop changing, and so we can't stand still either. We need to be continuously building, measuring, and learning, talking to our users, making sure that the solutions that we provided are still fit for purpose. There's nothing worse than building something and finding out that it's the new legacy. You want to be continuously validating that you're delivering the value that you set out to deliver. And with the constant evolution of our end users, our platforms and infrastructures, they need to evolve too. So it's a continuous iteration on all of these levels. We need to build, measure, and learn to make sure that we stay relevant. This is where product mindset really comes in, because if you take a project mindset, if you say, I'm going to run this project and it has an end date and it has a fixed solution, you're not acknowledging that the needs of your users are continuously evolving. It's going to become stagnant, it's going to become redundant, and it's going to become waste. But if you invest in a product team, a team that's dedicated to their users to serving their users, you'll find that you can continuously evolve that platform. You can continuously evolve those tools to meet their needs, and you won't need to rebuild and decommission or in a kind of repeating cycle like so many teams end up doing. Since 2018, I've been part of a platform engineering team. It was first at Pivotal and now at VMware Tanzu. And I meet so many organizations who wrestle with these same problems. The State of DevOps report last year picked up on 2 key patterns for success, and I've seen them work really well in the real world: product mindset and self-service. As a platform team, your developers are your users, like I said, and we need to understand their needs, make it easy for them to do the right thing. I'm going to talk about how these changes in approach could improve your velocity, your reliability, and your security as the next section of this talk. Because it is easy to default to the same old thinking, the same old ways of working, even when we're trying to do something new. We take a project approach sometimes, and we disband the team once we've got a minimum viable solution in place. They don't stick around, they go on to the next thing, the next shiny new thing. We build in a vacuum. We never ask our users what they need from us, resulting in over-engineering or launching something that's not really fit for purpose. We fail to get the adoption that we need. We try to do big design up front. We get bogged down in analysis paralysis instead of iterating through a build, measure, and learn cycle, delivering value as early as possible in small increments. And we often route requests through ticketing systems and humans instead of surfacing new capabilities through APIs or adopting a self-service model. When we adopt that product mindset and a user-centric approach to building platforms, we can have a huge impact on developer productivity. We abstract away a lot of that complexity we just talked about, so we can focus on building apps for our users. And we can use developer experience practices to further make the platform a really compelling proposition for our developers. I really love this quote, and I really love this book. If you've not read Team Topologies, I highly recommend it. They say that a platform is a curated experience for engineers who are the customers of that platform, and that can include everything from, the educational services you provide when teams are adopting a new technology. It can include the documentation that you provide that's custom to your organization, and it can include a number of, plug-and-play services that give you options. If you're an application team. It should be, your internal platform should be the easiest to adopt, not the most difficult. Otherwise, you will get teams who will say, that's very nice, thank you for building that, but I'm just going to go over here and plug into AWS because that's easier for me. Because at the end of the day, they care about their users. So if you're not caring about them as your users, they will go elsewhere. I've talked a lot about building things, and I've talked a lot about velocity because it's one of the pain points that's most visible, But I also want to talk about the other elements of building platforms, building tooling, and talk about reliability and how some of the core SRE practices, things that I advocate for, can actually also help you build that dialogue and overcome the wall of confusion. Velocity is important, but reliability is fundamental. Your users don't care about any hot new features that you're shipping if your service is unavailable or too slow to use. This is table stakes. Reliability is fundamental. How many people in the room have a job title resembling SRE, a site reliability engineer? Have we got any SREs in the room? No, none. That's the first, actually. That's the first. A lot of ops and DevOps teams were rebranded to SREs without adopting any of the practices and mindsets of SRE. So it's interesting to see that we don't have any. But one of the things that I see an awful lot in the clients that I work with is the the sort of rebranded ops team, the new SRE team in name only, folks who haven't adopted any of the fundamental practices of SRE. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that I consider to be the fundamentals of SRE, which is service level indicators, SLIs, service level objectives, and error budgets. So to give you a very brief definition of these, so a service level indicator is it should be a really strong proxy for your users' happiness. It should be a metric that's opaque. It should be measurable from outside of your system. And it should correlate very, very highly with your users' happiness. Your service level objective is what you set as the amount of user happiness that is acceptable, because 100% uptime is never your goal. And you usually express a service level objective as a number of nines. So for example, 3 nines would be 99.9% of availability or uptime or something like that. But the most important thing about your SLO, it should be defensible. If you don't achieve your SLO, you should know that there is a problem and you should be compelled to solve that problem. And how these concepts work across team boundaries is an interesting area, because it drives a really useful conversation, especially when you're building a service that depends on other services. As I said, 100% isn't your target. Not only that, but reliability and resilience, when you aim for those very, very high levels, 5 nines, 6 nines, they introduce an awful lot of complexity, and that introduces cost into your system. So there is always a trade-off to make. 100% is never your target. There will always be a small amount of acceptable failure in your system, and the investment that you need to drive those very, very, very high levels of reliability are often don't have the business case associated with them to justify the investment. When you're getting started with SLIs, SLOs, and error budgets, I recommend thinking about it in terms of time. Time isn't the only way to measure these things, but time is something that we all understand. It's a common thing. We know how to reason about time. So your error budget being the inverse of your service level objective and expressing it in minutes is a very useful way to kind of assess what level of SLO you want to be setting for your service. So for example, 2 nines, 99% SLO gives you an error budget of 403 minutes in a 28-day period. That's quite a lot of time. That means that you can have an awful lot of human intervention, a lot of manual processes in the support of those services. As you get lower and lower down there, you have a look at 4 nines. So if you wanted to aim for 99.99% availability, suddenly your error budget looks very, very tiny. You've got just over 4 minutes of error budget in a 28-day period. That's not enough for a human holding a pager to reasonably get paged, get their laptop out, open their laptop, log in, and start inspecting. At 4 nines, you are looking at investing in an awful lot of automated failover, high resiliency and redundancy in your systems, and that, as I said, that comes with a lot of additional cost. But you do find folks aiming for those very, very high levels of reliability without taking on the necessary investment, while they still rely on human intervention in the event of an incident, which is unrealistic. As I mentioned earlier, these tools and practices can help us balance velocity and reliability, balancing change with stability. But how does it work in practice, and what do we need to think about when we set our service level objectives? So I'm going to talk about how SLOs and error budgets inform our decision making. This is a really nice sort of illustration of the economics of investments in reliability, and I wanted to just whiz through this today. So as you can see, like And as I kind of talked about, as you get to those very, very high levels of reliability, there's an exponentially higher cost associated with those because of the automation, the redundancy, and the failover that you need to build into your system, the complexity, but also the redundancy. There's also a decreasing probability that anybody notices that tiny service interruption. Think about how often you look at your phone and something's unavailable and you think, oh, I've just got bad signal, you know. The likelihood that anybody notices a failure decreases rapidly with the addition of extra nines on your SLO. And again, there's another line here, which is, does anybody care? Your service may not be available, but they might just come back in a couple of minutes' time, and it might all be fine. They might come back in half an hour. You know, does anybody care? You know, what service are you actually delivering? We all strive for these very, very high levels of availability, but let's be realistic about what we're building and what our users need from it. And so when we look at the error budgets and the kind of the incident response and the engineering practices that you need to surround a service at these different levels of availability, it definitely changes depending on how many nines you're aiming for. For example, at the very low levels, you may not even need proactive monitoring and alerting. You may actually just get pinged by someone that says, oh, your service is unavailable, and that might be fine. It's a very low-tech solution, but depending on your service, that might be fine. At the next levels, you're looking at, alerting via some, really comprehensive monitoring. You might be doing 24/7 on-call, but that human intervention might be absolutely acceptable. You might be able to just switch it off and on again, and off you go. When you're getting to very high levels, you should be looking at automation of recovery, automated rollbacks of changes. You should be able to get to the last known good, the working solution, very rapidly in the event of an incident. And then, obviously, as you get higher and higher, you need automatic failover, you need automatic detection of failure, and you need automatic remediation of that failure. So think about the amount of engineering that would go into a solution that delivers that level of availability. Think about the cost associated with that, the team that you would need to have in place. And so when we look at things like this, the economics of reliability, these are conversations that we often don't have with our teams. It's like, actually, what practically should we be delivering as part of this service? And if we do need to deliver those very, very high levels, then let's set ourselves up sufficiently so that we can actually deliver that. So when we embrace this shifting left and you build it, you run it model, surely the application teams should own the error budget. Surely they're the people who are serving the end user. And we've said that that's ultimately what we care about. We care about delivering value to our end users. But let's say that end user expects 3 nines of availability, for example. Who gets to use that error budget of 40 minutes in every 28 days? Is it only the application team? Is it only the infrastructure team? If the platform team use the whole error budget, that doesn't leave anything for anyone else. And that doesn't seem right either. So again, it's a conversation that you need to have when you are a team of teams. It's a conversation that you need to have when you're depending on services delivered by others. The internal platforms, if they're serving multiple application teams, must provide a higher level of reliability than the applications that they support. And equally, the infrastructure as a service that is depended upon by the application teams and by the platform teams to deliver their services, they need to provide a higher level of reliability than the services that they depend on. So the platform and infrastructure teams are likely to be the places where you need to invest in that automation, where you need to invest in that failover, where you need to build in that redundancy. And I think we do see that quite commonly play out in organizations, but done as a symptom of, for historical reasons, not because they've actually sat down and said, what level of reliability do my users actually need from me? And how can we deliver it in the most efficient way possible? reliability needs to be everyone's goal because we can't achieve it on our own. An application team who depend on an infrastructure team can't deliver a reliable service without a reliable service that they depend on. So it needs to be a team sport, and that's what I always say. I think reliability and availability, they need to be ongoing conversations, especially when you're set up in this team of teams kind of configuration. You need to make sure that you're advocating for your users, and depending on where you sit in that kind of stack, your users are going to be different. You know, an infrastructure team needs to be advocating for the needs of the application teams that depend on them, and the application teams need to be really advocating for the needs of their users, the end consumers. So this user-centric approach can be applied to everything that we do, including those day two operations and reliability. A couple of years ago, this is just a bit of a case study. A couple of years ago, I was helping one of my customers get started with SRE practices, and we introduced the concepts of SLIs, SLOs, and error budgets to this team for the first time. They'd never worked in that way before. And when we arrived, they proudly told us that they had 100% uptime. And then when we dug into it a little bit, what we discovered was that actually all of their outages were pre-negotiated. And so they didn't have 100% uptime. They were just negotiating planned downtime. And of course, that might be okay for their users, but it might not be. Like, does your user really care whether or not you negotiated that downtime or not? In a lot of our sort of services that we deliver, that's not the case. That's not the case. Downtime is downtime. So anyway, I spent a week together with this platform team, and we brought some of the developers who were the early adopters of the platform into the room. You know, ultimately, the platform needed to help those teams achieve their SLOs of availability and performance in production. So we also set some service level objectives around the developer experience. You know, how easy was it to push to pre-production? What availability did the development team need in pre-production for them to remain pre-production to remain productive? But you know what I mean. We talked to the dev teams about what they needed, and we tried to break down those silos. You know, we're providing a service to you, and it's not the same as the service that we provide in production. That has different SLOs, but we are providing a service to you in pre-production as well. And throughout that week, we built that shared ownership for reliability by taking an interest in their user experience, by taking an interest in their users and their needs, and broke down some of those communication barriers about how to have better conversations about reliability. So I've talked a bit about developer experience and how platforms enable velocity. I've talked about SRE practices with a focus on developer experience and how you can have better conversations about reliability. And so now, to wrap up, I'm going to bring a little bit of security into the picture. When I was a release manager, like I said, at the start of my career, this has obviously influenced a lot of the work that I've done ever since. I was working with a security architect, and he wanted to know about every single change that was going into production. And I just remember this one conversation with him, and he was absolutely shocked when we had just shipped a release, and the very next day, I was talking to him about the next one. He was like, "Oh, come on, I've only just done one of your releases. I have to do another." And it was like, these were the days before continuous delivery practices were really that common. He was accustomed to working with teams that were shipping once every 3 months into production. You know, and so, you know, that really opened my eyes, and I think it also opened his eyes that, you know, these point-in-time security assessments are over. Continuous delivery requires us to adopt practices of continuous security as well. And unlike, you know, investments in resiliency and scalability, where the benefits are really felt by the engineers on call, the benefits of robust security practices are often invisible. You know, an absence of security incidents is not evidence of good security practices. One of my colleagues used to compare it to flossing. We all know we should do it because it's good for our long-term health, but many of us decide to skip it, because it's a chore. There's no immediate reward for doing it. You do it to prevent bad things in the future, and a lot of security improvement work falls under this category of chores. There's no immediate payoff, and it can get deprioritized as a result. It's human nature to avoid chores, especially if there's more interesting, rewarding, or urgent work on your plate to do. We've had a lot of fun over the past couple of years with CVEs, and I think it's opened a lot of people's eyes to how unprepared we are when these things occur, how unprepared we are to do large-scale patching and upgrades of our infrastructure and our applications. And it's been useful in many ways to shed a light on those invisible security practices that we often deprioritize, because when we need them, we really need them. Security processes that create friction and slow down development or make operational tasks more difficult are the ones that get deprioritized. Those are the ones that get avoided. It breeds a culture where backdoors and workarounds and shortcuts can become really common, and where talking openly about security is discouraged. And so I'll talk briefly about 2 ways that we can address the cultural aspects of security, which actually, if you do embrace them, can improve your security posture and improve your security practices. So one is the psychological safety to talk about these issues, and the other is really taking a user-centric approach to your security processes. I'm going to have to whiz through some of this because I only have 2 minutes left. But I do want to introduce the concept of psychological safety, because psychological safety is defined as a belief that you will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So psychological safety is fundamental for having a healthy conversation around security. If you find a vulnerability or you find something that's not going well with security, you need to be able to report that without fear of there being repercussions. You need to celebrate people speaking up about these issues. We need to create a culture where we can all talk about security openly and honestly, even if our security posture isn't what we want it to be right now, because without talking about it, we'll never fix it. We need the security specialists within our teams to not be policing everyone, but to be educating and supporting the rest of the organization to adopt better practices. We need to be realistic about where we are today and aspirational about where we want to get to, and we need to iterate towards that, because otherwise we'll never get there. We need to celebrate our successes when they happen, and we need to measure our improvements. And it's only really by having this dialogue, in the same way that reliability is a team sport, so is security. It's only by having this dialogue across teams and with each other and being open about where our areas of improvement are that we can actually make meaningful change to the culture around security. Making the right thing to do the easy thing to do is easier said than done, but it will make a huge impact on how you can improve your security posture. So if you make a security improvement that negatively impacts the productivity of your colleagues, then at best you'll breed resentment, and at worst you'll inadvertently encourage teams to find their own solutions, which may be less secure. You might be impacting employee experience, you might be contributing to attrition in the process. So when you talk about security, think about the people who are going to have to implement that process. Think about the people who are going to have to implement that practice. How can we maybe automate some of those chores, some of that toil that we have around security, so that it's not a burden? Especially when we think about all of that shifting left, have we shifted too much of that left as well? Like, think about the people who are going to have to implement this stuff. So to make it, easy to do the right thing, I'm once again going to be talking about product mindset. It's a bit of a theme today. We collaborate on solutions instead of mandating or imposing processes and practices that might not be fit for purpose and hurt our productivity. We need to remove that manual work. We need to remove the chores. We need to automate the toil and invest in this so that we can efficiently maintain a good security posture. And we need to take that user-centric approach. We need to think about the developer experience, and we need to build tools and processes in a collaborative way that make our applications and our platform secure by default. So I'm going to wrap up now by just summarizing some of the things that I've learned over the past decade of DevOpsing around Europe. Platforms and platform teams that take a user-centric approach and adopt a product mindset unblock velocity. They unblock that path to production that is so hard for so many organizations. We need to have better conversations about reliability, and we need to take a shared ownership of reliability. This is not something that you delegate to your infrastructure team. It's not something you delegate to your platform team. We all need to care about this. And of course, we need to adopt security practices with a user-centric mindset. We need to talk about security more openly, and we need to build processes and practices that make it easier to do the right thing and don't encourage people to take alternative solutions. By engaging, empowering, and supporting developers, you can create a developer experience that makes your internal tool sets more compelling than anything that any external party has to offer. And when you get that right, you really unblock and unlock a huge amount of potential in your organization. So thinking back to 2010 and the pain that we all felt trying to bridge the divide between dev and ops, I can see that we've come a long way. But for most teams, this isn't a solved problem. There's always areas where we can improve. We can't just shift left and hope for the best. To get this right, we do need platforms that help deliver value and ease that path to production. That's the main thing that I want to leave you with today. When you're designing and improving your systems and your organizations, we can stop building silos if we take a user-centric approach and we pay attention to the humans involved. We pay attention to the people. Thank you.